Good afternoon and welcome everyone. My name is Zoe Polk and I'm the Executive Director of the East Bay Community Law Center. I'm so grateful to be having this conversation with you. I'm humbled to see so many colleagues that I know tuning in, and also to meet new colleagues who are interested in hearing from 4 Black women leaders about Juneteenth, about how we've built careers on centering Black liberation, and what this moment requires. And spoiler alert, it requires more than a federal holiday. Rebecca, Imani, and I have a special honor of stepping into our executive director roles early in 2020. As we began our tenure at our respective organizations, we quickly recognized the unique bond we shared of leading civil rights organizations through transition. And so we established community with one another. And as 2020 unfolded with COVID-19, economic destabilization, and a fraught election year, our network of support was critical. And so today we will focus our time together on Juneteenth and our collective ambition for Black liberation. I'm so excited to have Dominique Turrentine, Manager of Strategic Initiatives at Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, joining us as well. And she is bringing her deep experience in implementing racial justice structures in philanthropic organizations to this conversation. I just want to take a special moment to thank everyone, all of our longtime supporters and sustainers at the National Employment Law Project, at the National Center for Lesbian Rights, and of course at the East Bay Community Law Center. We hope that you will engage with us by posting your questions in the chat and also tweeting about this event with the hashtag #FreedomToLead. We will try to incorporate your questions in our discussion. And with that, I'd like to ask Dominique, Imani, and Rebecca to introduce themselves. And let's start with Imani.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Imani Rupert Gordon. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm the Executive Director for the National Center for Lesbian Rights. NCLR is a legal organization, and we work to achieve the civil and human rights of all LGBTQ people and our families. I know that you can hear the ice cream truck outside, and I don't know what to do about that. I am so sorry. But I am thrilled to be here today to have this amazing discussion with you all. Thanks so much for having me.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rebecca Dixon, Executive Director of the National Employment Law Project, also known as NELP. NELP is a more than 50-year-old organization that is operating at the intersection of racial justice and workers' rights. We fight to raise wages, to improve working conditions, and to give folks access to jobs and to prosperity. And I am super excited to be here. Transition is a time of vulnerability for any organization, and as Black leaders, in some ways, the risk has been greater for us. And that's because we come in where there's a perception that we are not as competent, that we aren't the typical leaders, and the risk of failure is great. And so failure is really not an option because failure is taken in a more, runs deeper, essentially. And then on the flip side, we have a reputation for fixing things and cleaning things up. And so expectations are high when we come in, which can also mean that patience is low. So what we will be able to talk to you about today is what liberation means and how it means freedom from limits, the limits that have been placed on us as leaders, and sometimes even the limits that we place on ourselves and our minds, but really looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Dominique Turrentine. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a manager at the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative on our Strategic Initiatives team. And I just want to start by saying I am so honored to be here and honored to have been asked to do this. And this is a moment for all of us. We've all seen what's happened over the last year with our philanthropic commitments to racial equity spurred by kind of the events of last summer, but the backdrop of the pandemic and hate and violence against all marginalized groups, with specifically Black folks and specifically Black women. And so with this, not only am I honored to have this conversation today because I get to be surrounded by these awesome leaders, but I'm honored to be able to hold the space and to be able to support this space, to hear some of the challenges that we've been up against, some of the the roses and thorns, and really be able to draw that through line between the women's experiences on this call and folks in your organization, in your philanthropies, in your communities, so that we can continue to live out our commitment. So Juneteenth this year kind of marks our chance to revisit what we said and ask ourselves, and truly ask ourselves if we've been holding up our end of the bargain. So I am floored that I get to do this and really excited to kick us off with the first question. So, and I will start with Zoe. This weekend will be the 156th anniversary of the Juneteenth holiday. And yes, and to your point, no, a federal holiday is it's great, but it's not enough. But we'll get back to that. But with that, what is at the top of your mind as you're thinking about the significance of this holiday? What do you think about that?
So much. I think about, well, first of all, can I start with some joy?
Yeah, 100%.
My twin sister Lauren and I are Juneteenth babies. We were born on June 18th. And so in our family, Juneteenth is about celebrating life. And she's coming to visit me this weekend. We spent over a year and a half apart. So I am grateful and definitely joyful that I get to spend my birthday with my twin sister. So definitely want to just start with that joy piece. When I think about Juneteenth as it's bound up in my leadership journey over the last year, I actually go back to 12 years ago when I started as an attorney at East Bay Community Law Center. And that was at the beginning of the 2008 financial crisis. Most of my clients were African-American seniors seeking help because their houses were in foreclosure. And we would later learn that this was the significant subprime mortgage fraud in which Black folks were targeted for wealth theft. And so when I came on as executive director last year, and when it was clear that COVID-19 was going to be a crisis, I thought about what I would have liked to know in 2008. What would leadership, as a person in leadership, what would I like to know about helping an organization, helping a whole community survive a crisis? And so my first step was to work with our in-house data analysts to think about who comes into EBCLC's doors in times of crisis. In 2008, who was coming into our doors? In 2016, during the election crisis, who was coming into our doors? And who was in most need of our services? And I learned that our average client profile was a Black woman, roughly between the ages of 18 and in 40s, with one dependent. And I thought about this in partnership with everything that we were seeing nationally. Black women are more likely to be evicted. More likely experiencing high job loss as a result of COVID. Black communities disproportionately devastated by COVID-19 virus, but not prioritized for early vaccine access. And how critical Black women were to keeping this country safe as essential workers, and also in the Georgia Senate elections. As Rebecca said earlier, just how much responsibility is placed on Black women in times of crisis. And how much is not done to center Black women, even though we do so much to save and quote unquote clean up messes. So, when we started this year in 2020, I decided I wanted to lead from the margins. I launched this year saying that we are going to center women of color, Black women, Latinx women, Indigenous women. The national rhetoric may be that it's time for us to heal, but we know that healing requires accountability. And East Bay Community Law Center is prepared to be accountability partners. We wanted to launch and say, that's what this is going to look like for us. We are going to be your accountability partners. We're going to bring everybody along. And so we issued a Women of Color Center platform with 8 recommendations that really we feel uplift, if enacted, will uplift women of color and therefore uplift whole communities. And that's canceling student loan debt, relief and freedom for undocumented workers, students, and community members, healthcare for all. We believe that these solutions will transform the lives of Black women, women of color. And because we know that women of color always take care of everyone else in their families, always take care of everyone else in their communities, we know this will uplift entire communities. So my leadership journey over this past year has been ensuring the internal and external alignment with this platform. How can we make sure, how can I be leading an organization and building an organization that centers women of color and certainly thinks about my leadership in a way that enables us to do that.
And I love that. We always say, when you center Black women, when you center Black women's liberation, it liberates all of us. And I just really love to hear that echoed back. Imani, I'm going to ask you the same question. What is at the top of your mind as you reflect on this holiday? And also, what's bringing you joy in this holiday?
Sure. Thank you so much. If I can just say the ice cream truck left, so I wanted to just add to my introduction too. NCLR, like I was saying, we're a legal organization. We work to achieve civil and human rights for all LGBTQ people, and we do that specifically through in 4 different ways. Litigation is impact litigation is largely what NCLR is known for, but we also do a great deal of work around legislation, public policy, and then community education, which is it's our thought that you have to, in order to get to justice, you need to take a lot of different ways to get there. It's going to take all ways, and it's going to hit different people in different ways. And so we want to make sure that we're always working on all of those things. And so I just wanted to add that too. But thank you so much for the question. Today has been an incredibly busy day. We've heard a lot of decisions that have come out today, but specifically in regards to Juneteenth is something that we've been waiting for. I think we heard that it might happen on Tuesday, which is kind of exciting, but President Biden just signed the Juneteenth National Independence Day Act. And this is recognizing Juneteenth as the 11th federal holiday. And I think this is particularly amazing. I'm really excited about this. And I know that's not always the most popular decision around this, but when we originally conceived of this panel, we were talking about it because we were thinking about what is happening at this year anniversary of, us starting these positions in this pandemic, but we're also seeing people and organizations talking about Juneteenth and writing about Juneteenth for the very first time ever. And for folks that grew up with this holiday being a very important part of who we are, seeing this happen in a way that that felt just more performative than substantive, I think that's really stood out to a great deal of us. And I think this this act is important for a couple of reasons. And the first is that I know that there are people in our community that feel like there's something that's been taken away because there's this way that we've celebrated a holiday and now it looks like it might be turned into something else. But I see that in a different way. And that is, I think that we have to normalize celebrating holidays of the most underrepresented folks. These are the types of structural changes that we deserve. And, I have a long history with sort of my own education around how I came to know what the education I got at home and the education that I got at school. And I would have been really grateful for a little bit more connection there. And I'm excited that that's going to exist. Now, in order to do this, it does mean that we have to make sure that we are being substantive. This isn't something that you can just make a federal holiday. And our country does not have the best history with that. And so while this is happening, this was just signed today, we all have to take responsibility and treat this like a holiday that, and give it the recognition it deserves. And I think all of those things are important. When I think about what this means for my own leadership, one of the things that stands out to me whenever I think about Black leadership is the popular television show Scandal. And I remember when it came on and I, was a big fan of this, but I remember in one particular episode, Olivia Pope's father was telling her, I've always told you that you have to work twice as hard for half as much. And I remember hearing that like that's something I've heard before. But I remember the discussion about that the next day, that all of these Black women were having that exact same experience. And they said, that's what my dad told me. That is how I grew up as well. And that really stood out to me, that it had never dawned on me that what my parents told my sister and me was something that other parents told their children, and that after this television show that we would be having this thought about that. And that had always stayed with me. If there's so many of us that grew up thinking that we have to work so hard for half as much, then what that makes, like what our leadership must look like. And so when I started at NCLR, that was something that was in the back of my mind. How can I make it easier for folks to be in positions like this, but then also to have a better experience at NCLR? How can we make it so that these institutional problems, the ways that racism and sexism and heterosexism and all forms of oppression seep into institutions, how can I help to dismantle those things? And I think that's something that's really important, And so one of the very first things that when I did when I got to NCLR was made Juneteenth an official holiday, because I do think that we deserve to have our holidays supported like that. But when I getting back to the question about things that are joyous, one of the things that that I wouldn't have expected is living through and having your first year at an organization through a pandemic. There's a lot of things to be learned there. And when at the time, we're like, oh my goodness, like how can this ever be done? But once you're in it, you realize there's a lot of things here. And so I've been really grateful that this pandemic has allowed me to be more present with my team and doing this through video calls, that we've all become more proficient this way. And that's also made us more accessible to a variety of audiences, which I think is really important. It also means that all the ways that we said that folks aren't able to work remotely and work from home and do some accommodations that the most underrepresented folks sometimes need, we actually know that we can get through that those are accommodations we can make. And I think it's forced a lot of folks to think more creatively and more thoughtfully and more intersectionally for that reason. And then that this is one of my favorite things to say, but that we're all better when we're all better. We have to remember that as we're thinking through our own health, and if my health is connected to your health, like your health is to mine, then all of our liberation is connected as well. When we are getting to justice, when we're getting to freedom, that all of these things are connected. And so when we think about the intersections of our work, that this doesn't have to feel as separate as it is. And I think that's something that's also really important. So I would say all of those things have made, when I thought about like what Juneteenth is like over this past year, those are things that come up for me. But I've also been really grateful for the amazing partnerships we've been able to make. The amazing women on this panel, I've been really grateful to have in community and just doing this work with.
Thank you so much, Imani. And thank you for grounding us again in the fact that Juneteenth it's really important that it is a federal holiday. We can hold that and also strive for more. So I appreciate that. Rebecca, bring us home on this question. What are your thoughts? What are you reflecting on after this year?
So I'm reflecting on, so when we think about Juneteenth and freedom and how those Black folks must have felt, right? And so Black folks have our ancestors have gifted us with the ability to take urgency and trauma and then translate that into purpose and resilience and hope. And I feel like that translation has been part of what my leadership journey has been about. So we entered the year with the urgency around the racial justice uprising. We entered the year with a lot of urgency on the part of my staff about how we're going to change the culture. We've been working, and I've been leading racial equity work internally at the organization since 2016. So their hopes are high that we're gonna get there. And so all of that clashes with the external turmoil that we're seeing. And in the case of NELP, we actually had to spring into action around urgent needs, like unemployment insurance for workers who couldn't work because of the pandemic, worker health and safety related to the pandemic, and really trying to use those things as opportunities to lay the groundwork for long-term structural change. But we know that those impacts have been uneven. And so we have seen that certain folks are more impacted by this. So to talk about trauma is something that most all of us are holding because of COVID and the ways it's impacted us, some more closely than others. But I think one of the things that became apparent to me is that trauma shows up in the way it keeps us from being able to hold on to anything that's positive. It actually puts us in a place of negativity bias. So we have this gravitational pull towards what might be threats in the environment. And so when you're trying to lead in that environment, you have to figure out, how do you get your staff out of a place of trauma? Or first, let's acknowledge that that's what is happening. And then how do we move ourselves to reclaiming our resilience? And so we worked on building meaning together and making meaning together. We really leaned into our purpose and focused on our mission and the workers that it's going to benefit. And to end on a positive note, I think where we are now as an organization internally is really like looking towards that hope and moving towards that hope And, there's a phrase called heliotropic hypothesis, and it's based on sunflowers. And sunflowers track the sun when they're young. And at some point they stop and they don't track the sun anymore. Well, for our purposes, we are trying to continue to track the sun and always continue to grow, and so not get stuck. And we want to actually work towards the most positive image that we hold of ourselves, individually and as an organization. And I think folks are fired up and excited about that. And so that's the hopeful note I want to end on.
Thank you all so much. Now, as we move into the next question, a deeper reflection on your leadership journey over the last year, can you share an example of work that felt transformational for you and how it kind of connects to this movement for racial justice writ large? And we can start with you, Rebecca.
Okay, sure. So in terms of transformational this year, this first year, I came into the job wanting to really embody this mission for NELP to center the needs of workers of color in the policy that we are pushing and trying to make. And that doesn't mean we're being exclusive and not inclusive. It just means that we're centering folks who are normally at the margins and building the policy around them in a concentric circle so that they're not sitting over at the side and it's like, we'll come back and get you later, when we know historically we don't come back and get folks later. So really, like, what does that mean in practice in terms of how we do our work and what changes? And so I have been building this framework around occupational segregation and labor market inequities. And so occupational segregation is essentially, like, over time, this sort of sticky way in which workers of color, women, and immigrants are in the dirtiest, lowest paying, most dangerous jobs and are stuck there. And that it's not something that folks are really looking at as something that we can do something about with our government and our policies. But we actually, if we want to create an equitable labor market, we do have to use those policy levers to do that. And one of the reasons why we don't is because it's submerged, right? There's a way in which people think it's about personal choice, it's about education, it's about training, when we have these systems and structures that are being obscured. And so one of the things that keeps me fired up is that we can change this. So right now, the labor market, 9 in 10 jobs are racially segregated. Yes, 9 in 10, it's real. And yes, I can give you the citation. And that's in 2021. So we can change that. And when we integrate the labor market, when we have workers of color, immigrants, women moving into higher paying jobs, it's better for all of us. And so that's one of the things that I was able to launch in this year. And I'm really excited about all the partners that are joining in that work.
Thank you so much. I am going to ask that same question of Imani. What over this past year has been transformational, and how does it connect to the movement for racial justice?
Sure. I'm so proud of the work that NCLR has been able to do, but more than anything, I'm really proud of the effort that we are making to be more transparent. When we're thinking about how we support the most underrepresented folks, we know that systems are upheld when we're able to have these opaque policies and folks don't really know where things come from and how we do things. And so a great deal of the work that I'm trying to do is just make those more transparent and bring more people in so they can be part of these things. You know, honestly, everyone should be able to understand the way that our budgeting happens. Like, everyone should be able to understand that. Everyone should understand how we decide what cases that we choose. Everyone should be part of that process. And I also want to create a culture where if folks, after they leave NCLR, that they will be able to go and run any type of organization everywhere, because that is something that should be available to everyone that wants to do this work. That should be available. And so that's something we want to do. Rebecca touched on something really important, and that is, you know, if we don't start with the most underrepresented folks, then we're not going to get there. And that has always been a pillar for the way that NCLR has done our work. And I too like to make sure that that is the way that we're thinking about it. And so, there's this way that I talk about our movement, because there's ways that we get it wrong. But if you imagine that you are in a basement and you're in a basement with a bunch of different people, and that all of these people, they want to be let out of the basement, but the basement's locked. Inside, people are stuck behind bookshelves. There's boxes around. People are in dark corners. There's bikes and things that you can trip on and things that hurt you. So often when we look at the LGBTQ movement, we talk about the idea of justice being just unlocking the door. And once the door is unlocked, then maybe people can get out. But what we don't take in consideration is that, sure, if we unlock the door, the people that are standing in the front, that all they need to do is walk out, they would be fine. Those are the people that have the most privilege. But what we're actually trying to do is not unlock the door. What we're trying to do is get everyone out of the basement. And so our strategies should be about getting everyone out of the basement. So yeah, it means opening and unlocking the door so people can come out, but it also means that we need to send people in that are able to go into those deep, dark corners, that are able to help lead people out, that we're able to help folks that have had, bookshelves that have fallen on them, to take these bookshelves off and to get folks out of this basement. And that has to be the way that we do it. And too often when we talk about who we partner with as an LGBTQ movement, we will say, oh, well, we'll partner with locksmiths so that we'll open doors. But we have to figure out that everything is an LGBTQ issue. Every issue is a racial justice issue. Every issue is an economic justice issue. And so we have to partner with everyone, not just locksmiths. We have to partner with furniture movers. We have to partner with people with flashlights that are going into those deep corners to get folks out. And that's what our movement has to look like. We have to concentrate on serving the most underrepresented folks, and then everyone benefits from that. And it doesn't work the other way around.
Appreciate that. Thank you so much. Zoe, I'm going to kick it over to you. What has been transformational over this last year? And how does it connect to the movement for racial justice?
Yeah, it's thank you for that question. And I really appreciate listening to Imani and Rebecca respond to it. Rebecca, I didn't know about 9 in 10 jobs of that occupational segregation, and that's certainly something that I need to do more work on. Just learning a little bit more about that, and I'm so grateful I have a friend in you who can do that, who can help me on that journey to learn more about that. So for people who do not know the East Bay Community Law Center, we combine legal services with community-centered policy advocacy. So for us, community-based lawyering is fighting alongside of our clients in their individual legal cases, and then advocating for legislative and policy changes. And so this strategy, which we also combine with a robust clinical program, has yielded key successes, including sparking the national movement to eliminate criminal fines and fees, which impoverish entire families. In 2020, we fought for an eviction moratorium to say stop evicting people during this time of this deadly virus, right? And this went into place early in March. And early in the pandemic, and 6 months before the national eviction moratorium went into place. Given how overrepresented Black folks in particular are in evictions nationwide, and certainly with corporate evictions, we definitely believe this moratorium serves as a national model and save folks' lives. And so community-based lawyering also for us is thinking about how do we lend expertise, or how do we lend things that we know as lawyers, whether that's the matrix of legal codes and statutes. How can we lend those to the folks who are really doing the cutting edge and transformational work? And so that very much means, how do we play support roles for movement leaders and for organizers? And one of the most critical partnerships we have and have had for decades is with the Black Organizing Project. And when I think about a transformational victory last year, I think about their journey, not just over the last decade, but certainly in the last year. And on March 3rd of 2020, after long time organizing, the Black Organizing Project went to Oakland Unified School District, and the school district agreed to hear a resolution to eliminate the school police department, but they rejected it. less than 4 months later, on June 25th, it went back to the board. And they unanimously voted to eliminate police in schools. And so we know what happened in the time here between March and June of last year. And people have all sorts of ways of talking about it, whether it's racial justice awakening or whether it's accountability for things that have long been known but just not acted on. But essentially that created an opening that wasn't there just 4 months before. And this, we think about defund police, and it's the nationwide momentum to really be thinking critically about how much billions of dollars, of our dollars, of Black folks' dollars, are invested into police, and how can we invest those public dollars actually back in Black communities, which is, I think, is the genesis of what defund police means. And I'm grateful for the work that was done, to get that resolution passed at the school board. I'm grateful for the work that has been done since then by the Black Organizing Project to say, okay, this is the way in which you hold community to make sure these dollars are spent in a way that actually does take care and value Black life. And we certainly hold this triumph with the painful reality of what it cost us, and the lives of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and also Raheem Brown, who was killed by the Oakland police at his school in 2011. And so absolutely, this work has felt transformational and indicative of the moment we're in, but it came at great cost, and it still is coming at too much of a cost in my view.
Yeah, a lot of this work is coming with a heavy cost. So I appreciate you naming that. Before I get into the next question, I just want to remind folks in the audience, if you have questions, please add them to the chat. I don't have to ask all of them. I do have a list here though, but please add them to the chat and we'll be sure to get to them. All right, so this next one is meaty. So I'm going to take a little bit to read it. So just, as executive directors, trust is critical to your role. It's incumbent on you to cultivate trust of your board, staff, clients, donors, and institutional funders. At the same time, you're operating the era of trust Black women. Have you created and asked for trust, particularly as you've navigated your organization through the leadership transition? So I'll let that sit. And I will kick it off. I will go back around the same direction, kick it off to Zoe.
Thank you for that. I trust Black women as something I have a complicated relationship with. I certainly trust Black women, and certainly Imani and Rebecca have been, as I said at the start of this call, just so helpful to me as I'm continue to be brand new, continue to navigate an organization in transition, and think about where's the ways that I can take more risks and be bolder in the ways that this role allows me to do. I'm also thinking about, so when I think about the trust that I need and the trust that I've been trying to build, I've been so grateful to be invited to lead spaces that are are trying to get to a place of transformation. So we have partners and collaborators who have invited me, who have said that we are on this journey, whether, some of those folks came as of Juneteenth last year, and some of those folks that came before then, and some of those folks that may have come more recently, but said we are on a journey as an organization. And these are organizations who may be legal services organizations, maybe labor organizations, and philanthropic organizations. And so we're on a journey, and we would like your partnership and your help in figuring out how we can better center racial justice, how we can do more with the power that we have and the leverage that we have. And just, before I stepped into this role at EBCLC, I established a racial equity framework for the entire city of San Francisco. So I'm thinking about a very, one of the leading cities in the country that has a very strong reputation for being progressive, not a strong reputation for racial justice. And so a big part of my work over the previous decade was, how do we get a city that has all the right values and all the aims? How do we get them to lean closer into a racial justice vision? And so to be in EBCLC and to have a very unique and a very special way in which I can be in relationship with folks, because my team and this organization is known for pushing very progressive and transformational solutions statewide and having national impact, is very meaningful for me. I kind of market or sell myself as someone who can help organizations and people, including my own organization, transition from race neutrality, from saying race doesn't matter, everyone should have the same, to racial equity, saying race very much matters. So how do we name and center race when we are thinking about solutions that will, hopefully transform people's lives? And so I've been honored to be, as I said before, be an accountability partner. And that's the trust that I've been trying to build, certainly through the reputation and the work that I built in San Francisco, and hopefully in this last year. Trying to be an accountability partner and a collaborator with institutions. And that has looked in a lot of different ways. And one of the ways that I have particularly been grateful for is when some of our partners at philanthropic organizations who are, investors in EBCLC and believe in this work invite me to speak to their boards and invite me to think through how we can make more space in philanthropy for Black-led organizations. I think many folks who maybe in this meeting and on this call are familiar with the New York Times article and the Echoing Green report that came out last year, naming race specifically as the defining factor for why Black-led organizations are not resourced in the way that white-led organizations are. It is solely about race. And so when I think about trust and the trust that I need and the trust that I cultivated, it's really about thinking through the ways in which partners are making space for me in organizations that traditionally, to Imani's point, are maybe have dark corners, or just, maybe in a place where leadership like mine is not often lifted up. And so that has been, I would say, really meaningful and something that I'm excited to do more of in this next year.
And so you said something that really resonated with me about when you mentioned the article, the New York Times article, because what we see either, and not necessarily in any specific institution, but we see is kind of akin to what Rebecca mentioned earlier about this idea of readiness or meritocracy when it comes to Black-led orgs, and when it and having to really push hard. And it's not just Black-led orgs, but I'm going to talk about Black-led orgs now, where there's this belief that there's an inherent that by choosing this, you're inherently doing something that is, you're doing someone some type of favor. When you look at the data, like the data that everyone is so committed to looking at, you see that that's actually fundamentally untrue. And some of these are some of the highest performing organizations. So it's kind of navigating that dissonance. So I just really appreciate you naming that. But I will step back a little bit and get back over to Imani to answer the same question. And let me know if you need, it was a long one, so I'm happy to repeat it.
So much. So I really appreciated what you said, and Dominique, you as well. I think the question about trust building is an important one. And there's only one way I know to build trust, and that is by being in a relationship with people. And that is the only way that I know how to do it, and do it in a way that's authentic. And that is an important part of my leadership, and something that I'm working on. But what I do with my my team, I haven't really, over this past week, I think over the past 2 weeks, I've met one of my team members in person. But before that, everything was over the computer. And what that meant is just anytime anyone had a question for me, I asked them to, set up a meeting with me. That I reach out to folks when I haven't heard from them in a while. And I'm trying to build a relationship with everyone. And I've had to have some really difficult conversations over this past year and a half. And every time I say that I'm going to be completely honest about the ways that I'm thinking through this. I want to get to a place where we understand the process and we have some shared values there. And I want people to understand my leadership just like I want to understand theirs. And that's something that's really, really important to me. And, if I'm also honest about what's, when we think about what is difficult in our roles, we know that fundraising is something that's difficult in our roles. And we know it's true the research is out there. We know that that it is harder for organizations led by Black people to be funded at the same levels. We know that those are not consistent. So that's true as well. But anecdotally, you don't see as much research about this, but if you happen to be a Black person leading an organization and have talked to someone else, what that person would tell you and what folks have told me is that individual funding is something that changes as well. That when people are getting to know you, they test you differently. And it's one of those things, I remember my dad told me when I was in 3rd grade, I asked, how do you know if someone's racist or if they just don't like you? And he said, you like when it's racism, you just know. And that was really not helpful for me when I was in third grade, but I've remembered that. I've remembered that since, and that has been the most helpful way for me to understand something. And so when I'm saying that you know that these things are different because of who you are, that is something that we're aware of. And I think that that's really important. And when I talk to my team, I'm honest about that. I'm honest about what I bring to this table and what I'm good at, the ways that I think that we can be particularly successful, but also that we have to acknowledge that I'm a different leader than someone else might be. And in ways that other leaders might excel, that might be harder for me in a particular way. And I'm honest about that. And that gets to working with authenticity and just feeling comfortable about who you are, because a lot of us didn't get to where we are because we were showing our entire authentic selves all the time. A lot of us got to where we are because we learned to share a version of our authentic self. And as I've grown, I also realize how important it is for you to be able to share all the parts of you, who, like, what has made you who you are. And that's an important part of your perspective and of your leadership. And so when I'm practicing authenticity, for me, it's not just practice being honest, it's actually getting back to a place where I've maybe polished something and now I'm unpolishing it, that I'm letting something be a bit more real than I've ever had it. And that's different for some people. That not everyone has to worry about getting back to being more authentic. And people sometimes just work on becoming who they are and just adding polish to that. And I think that that's something really important. And then the last part I wanted to say is that representation is important, but it's not everything. And I say that because I believe in trusting Black women. That's important. And it's also important to challenge leadership. And I want to be careful about the ways that we do that, because we're not challenging leaders because of who your leader is, but it is a good practice to challenge leadership. But representation is often the way that people see and hear and feel a shared experience, and that's worth something. So it's important in our government, it's important in our institutions, it's important in our communities, because when people have never felt like they've been represented, we know what that feels like. Then we also know that the solutions that come from these organizations and from these institutions, we don't think they're meant for us. And very often they're not. That is literally what intersectionality is about, is when a structure is not set up for someone based on the system and their intersecting identities. And so that's going to be something that's really important. We have to think about how we're going to find solutions that work for all of us and how the communities feel like these solutions will work for them. And representation often gets us there. It's not everything, but it is something. And I think that that's important.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you naming a number of things, but the thing that stood out to me was the piece around how this last year has really forced us to be authentic or bring a certain version of ourselves to work that maybe we weren't before. And I know for me personally, my leadership has shifted 180 this year, and just the level of comfort with, like, you're going to get the version of me you're going to get today, and we're just going to have to be okay with it because of the context. So I just appreciate you naming that as a way to build trust and connection. Rebecca, bring us home on this question. How have you built trust, particularly in this year of transition?
So I would say, to start with, trust is not automatic. On the one hand, it's earned, but on the other hand, it's ultimately given. So I want to acknowledge up front that I benefited from being at NELP for 10 years before I became the ED. So I had been building relationships and I think came into the role very grounded. I was also fortunate enough for the prior ED to do relationship transfer with funders and allies, which I think was enormously helpful. And we did have funders rally around us around the emergency and the need for us to step up our work to benefit workers out there. So that was amazing, and I have deep gratitude around that. I want to talk about, like, so what is trust? What makes trust? I think of it as positive intentions plus competency to make that real, plus communicating and aligning around the expectations, the goals, and the progress. And as a first year ED, there's a lot of spaces where you're trying to do that. And I think honestly wasn't necessarily able to do it well in all of the spaces. I did try very hard to make sure I did it well with my staff. They are the most important stakeholders for the organization. Without them, there's no organization. I would say that one of the things I did was ask for trust. There's no mind reading. Let's just put it out there. I've also tried to bring evidence for what I'm saying, to back that up, and to line up validators where possible. I think owning your own mistakes and being open to feedback and learning and growing on this journey. I echo what Imani said about being yourself, like being able to be yourself in this role, not who folks think you should be in this role, and being able to trust your own judgment around this. As Black women, our lived experience really does contribute to our ability to have bold visions about what is possible. I grew up poor in rural Southwest Mississippi. I believe everything is possible. Like, I'm here, I went to law school, I made all of these things happen with a lot of support and luck and all of those things, right? And talent, but all of that. So I come into this space with a vision of possibility. So we can have an equitable labor market. It is possible. And I would say a learning and growth experience for me has been letting go of we have to do more with less, letting go of scarcity as like the frame and struggle as the frame. So coming into this space and believing that things are possible, but oh my God, they're going to be hard, right? Letting go of that. And part of liberation is about freedom from limits, building to abundance, and stepping into ease and owning our own brilliance in this space and supporting the brilliance of other folks. So part of trust is connection, and that's investing in our success. So I do this training with my staff about feedback across lines of difference. And lines of difference like race, gender, power, generation, lots of lines of difference. And so us stepping into these roles, often we're in a line of difference with a funder. And so with the training, I started with having folks sit down, pair off, talk to each other for a minute each about a time in your life when someone did you a favor, when someone gave you the inside scoop on something, when someone went out of their way to make sure you're successful. And then we come back together and we have a few examples. And what I ask folks is, well, what did you have in common with that person? And there's often something deep in common with that person. And so what that says to us is that it's super easy to say, I'm gonna go over here and tell her that her dress is crooked because I want her to be successful and not be embarrassed, right? When it's a line of difference, it's hard. Are they gonna get offended? Is it gonna hurt their feelings? So we have to like dig deep and actually go across that line of difference. And so for us, that means supporting us. That means giving us feedback. That means reaching out and treating us the way you would treat other folks who remind you of you. And so that's how I would close this out.
Thank you so much. I'm mindful that we are close to time. I don't know how that happened so quickly. We do have one last question for the group and then a question for me. So I can ask this one first and then close out with a question that's for me. So what has changed as we're wrapping up? What has changed in your organization, if anything, during this year of reckoning in terms of your organization's own racial justice work and agenda? And I can start with, I'm going to switch it up. I'm going to start with Imani.
You know, one of the things that I was so excited about with NCLR when I started here was that NCLR has always had a commitment to racial justice, and that has existed far longer than I've been here. And that's something that I was really proud of. And you know, and also in being here, you know, I was telling some of the folks on the panel that I had a really great transition here. What is really, you know, a lot of time, what makes or breaks an experience for an executive director is the relationship with the board of directors. And I came into a relationship with an amazing group of board of directors. And when I got here, they really took in consideration, this was without my saying anything at all, but they really said, you know, we are having a Black woman lead this organization. And we should probably go through a training ourselves, but we should also practice how to best support this person. And I was so grateful for that. That's not a practice that I see role modeled very well. And it's not something that I came in and told this team that I needed, but I was really grateful that they took so much initiative to make my experience better there. I thought that was really great. But the other thing is that I also think it's telling that our commitment to racial justice isn't by hiring a Black woman to lead the organization. And I think that that's really important too, because I have seen and heard people and organizations talking about their commitment to social justice or to racial justice, and doing that by pointing at a specific person. But that does not dismantle systems. And that is really important. When we think about what it takes to dismantle systems, it's not just putting someone in a position of power, it's building a structure that helps break down some systems and makes things better and safer for everyone there. And so since I've been here, I have made a commitment to going through we had the first racial justice training that we've had in a number of years in 2020. We've just committed to having a second one. And this is something that we'll commit to every single year, because one of the things that I think was also important, I heard someone talk about that they did some work around racial justice in 2020 because they hadn't done it in a while and it was coming up. But then in 2021, when we saw this rise in anti-Asian racism, that so many people felt unprepared because their look at racism was just through a very specific lens, that it wasn't a larger understanding of structural racism. It wasn't an understanding of critical race theory. It was just looking at what was happening right now and doing something that again felt performative, because though these things are different, there's a through line there. And racism it's something that we are able to learn about and we're able to talk about in a lot of contexts. And if we're doing the work, then it won't feel like it's such a stretch when we see these things, because they're very much related.
Thank you so much, Imani. And one thing I want to note, I've been so used to ending calls at the top of the hour. We actually are here till 3:15, so we have a little bit more space. And there is a question I wanted to get in, so yay. So I'm going to pass it over to Zoe. I'm sorry. Yes, Zoe, that works. Different part of my screen. So
thank you. I really appreciate everything, Imani. And Imani and Rebecca and I are in touch, and I have certainly learned about their transitions, and they're just really, just want to say again that they're just really great advisors and folks and women that I count on. And when I am navigating all the things that I didn't know when I signed up for this job, and just love hearing both of you talk as well about and also having that inside context of what that was like for you in the moment. So I love that we're all in this moment now, a year later, just reflecting on the time when we were all in it, very much in it. I think about what's changed for us, or changed for me, is that I think that as a first-time executive director, my inclination was to figure out how to play it safe in my first year, and figure out I have a lot to learn about this organization. I have a lot to learn about this staff. I have a lot to learn about our funders and our board. And my inclination was like, I need to do a bunch of listening. And essentially, as of March 2020, that went out the window, right? I was in a place that I can't listen anymore. I've got to take action. And then in June, and so I'm navigating that. And then as of June 2020, it's even more so of just like, so what are you going to do? You're taking action, and there is a national conversation going on where there are openings that we haven't seen before. So you are a leader of a very prominent organization in the Bay Area of California, a very prominent region, influential region in a very influential state. So Zoe, what are you going to do? Are you going to play it safe, or are you going to start taking risks? And that's essentially what's changed for me, is I have to be thinking about what is the riskiest thing that I can do in service of liberation? What is the riskiest thing that I can do that will certainly protect my organization, certainly protect my staff? But how can I lead from more of a risk-taking perspective, take more risks, and try and in the way of taking risks, receive more gains for our clients, for our staff, and certainly for Black folks broadly and nationally. So that's the question that I sit with on a daily. Am I being safe on this, or am I taking risks on this? And I think it's a day by day way for me. I think there are days where I'm more on the safer side, and there's days, and my best days and the days that I feel the most proudest are the days where I'm just like, this is a really big risk. I don't know how this is going to go, but this is exactly where we need to be going.
And what about you, Rebecca? Thank you.
I would say over this year, really giving some thought to the context. And so we have been doing internal racial equity work since 2016. And so a lot of what other organizations were spurred to do in 2020, we have been working on for several years. And so really just trying to own that and figure out, how do I get that to the next level? And so one of the things that we were able to do is really embed equity and culture in our leadership team. So we hired a chief of staff, and one of the things that they will be holding is equity and culture from a management perspective. So we have a structural racism change committee, and this person will be helping to staff that committee, but it's a testament to the level of importance it is for the organization and for its future. And then the last thing I would say is around visibility. So in seeing the way that people were inspired to get out in the street last summer around the visible ways in which people of color and Black people in particular are being held down, are losing out, sometimes to the point of losing their lives. That what I realized is I need to make labor market inequity visible so that we can actually take action around that. I need to make it visible that 40% of the jobs in the United States pay poverty level wages, and that we have created it that way and we can change it. And so I'm on a mission to unsubmerge labor market inequities so that we can actually start taking it on, so we can have goals on how we close the racial wealth gap. We have goals about wage gaps between white men and women of color, that we have goals around how we get to an equitable labor market. And we have a way to hold our governments, federal, state, and local, accountable for those goals.
Wow, this is a dope discussion. Thank you so much. Now I'm going to switch gears a bit and ask a question to everyone, I guess that includes me. And it's a little personal. And it's from, let's see, Kimmy. And it says, how have you sustained your spirit, navigated the cognitive dissonance that Black women leaders often have to navigate, where folks want proximity to Blackness, but don't actually want to be led by the decision-making of Black women particularly? Who would like to start? I'm going to let someone
I mean, I'll be easy. I've said it. The genesis for this virtual conversation is essentially what I do with Imani and Rebecca. Is like, I have built my folks around me who I can say, like, hey, like, this was hard on me today. Like, this interaction was hard on me today. Am I doing this wrong? What do you honestly think? And I think building, your council advisors, and they should be Black women. As a Black woman, my council advisors are Black women. Is the only way, is the most important way that I sustain my spirit. Because they definitely will tell me if they disagree with me, and they'll definitely tell me, like, no, actually they were wrong, and you need to stand in your truth, and what can I do to make sure you continue to stand in your truth, even if it's lonely, even if it's a tough place to be. So the way I sustain my spirit is through other Black women, 100%.
I would say that leadership is key. And when I am being faced with resistance, sometimes folks don't even know they're resisting you, that you lean into, what is the leadership response to this? And to own that I am a big girl and I can handle it. And handling it doesn't necessarily always mean responding to it. Sometimes it means responding to it, but it also means having a discernment to understand when something's not even about you. And you might be the one who's getting the blows, but it also just may not be about you. And so understanding that as leaders of these organizations, we don't measure ourselves by whether our staff are happy. We measure ourselves by whether we're taking care of them, we're surfacing and solving problems, and we are providing them a place that they want to come to every day for work. And so I I feel like I got a PhD in leadership over the last year. I would echo having a community of other women of color to lean on, to talk to vent to, and to help you shift into solutions mode.
I love those answers. And I mean, maybe this is the answer because mine's going to sound the same. I too have a sister circle of folks that that has been so incredibly important, and much more than I could have imagined. I thought we were just friends hanging out, and it turned out to be so much more than that. But the reason that that's important is because, just like Rebecca said, you know, in these positions, it's really important to recognize that from time to time, people respond in a way that that they probably shouldn't. And as much as possible, I try not to be one of those people. And it's not something, you know, you can't be perfect all the time. But a lot of time, if I can take care of myself, if I have a sister circle I can go to, I have my wife that I can go to, I have these ways that I can take care of myself, then I can present the best version of myself to this organization and give a great deal of myself and be able to, you know, empathy is something that's important to me. And I recognize that, you know, Rebecca, you said something really just brilliant that I really want to touch on. And that is sometimes when people are behaving a particular way, they don't realize they're doing that. They don't realize they're doing that to you, and they don't realize why they feel comfortable doing that to you. And that's not okay. But I also think that I've had the best interactions when after an experience like that I can remind people that being understanding that they're frustrated about something, and to remind them that I don't respond to them like that, and that to deal with the problem at hand, and to remind folks that, and I say this a lot, I'm telling you this not because I'm your supervisor. I'm telling you this because I don't speak to you like this. And that's not a way that I'm going to let you speak to me like this again. And that has worked so well for me. It's practicing authenticity again, and it's also showing up in the ways that I want to show up. And it's, you know, that's what I want my leadership to look like. You know, and I think that it's also important when we're thinking about how we support Black women in positions of leadership. The reasons that we are in these positions right now and the reasons that we're good at them is because someone gave us a chance to do a job that we were ready for. And I think it's important that you are ready for the job, because so often when we're looking at underrepresented identities, it'll be after some sort of national reckoning around whatever topic, and then someone will find some up and coming person who's not quite where they would be for the position I'm looking for, but someone will take them and put them in a position they're not ready for and not give them the support they need. And that is absolutely horrible, because our reputations aren't as flexible as our white male counterparts. And so when that happens, you're actually robbing this person of a really amazing professional experience. If we had just prepared this person, put them in a position, certainly, or put them in this leadership position and set them up for success, give them a mentor, figure out what they need to be successful. It has to come in both of those ways. And in my current situation, I said I have my sister circle, but I also have some executive director circles that keep me sane. And that's something that's really helpful. And I'm able to show up as my best self.
Thank
Dominique,
you.
I mean, I would just love to ask you, I know there's a question here, but just, you know, we're seeing it and talking about leadership in philanthropy specifically, we're seeing an unprecedented number of Black women taking on leadership roles in philanthropy. And I would love for you to just, you know, for telling, you know, certainly us, but like, you know, folks who are here, just like, what's it like to be a Black woman leader in philanthropy? How are making space for folks like Imani and Rebecca and I, which we are so grateful to you that you do that. And also want to shout out Tato, who is on, who's also been really helpful in that. And what is from your view as a Black woman and looking at all the Black women in leadership positions in philanthropy, how do you speak about it? What's your perspective in this moment?
Oh, wow. I appreciate you asking that. I was going to interject it, so I'm glad you asked. This moment, this has been the most transformative year of my life, both in a good way and not great ways. To our point about how we protect and rejuvenate our spirits, I have a therapist, a coach, a sister circle, another sister circle. I've done a lot of work to kind of build some, and I live if you hear anything moving upstairs, it's my parents live upstairs. So I'm very much enveloped in community, and it's been necessary because, as you can imagine, it's been really hard. And I don't want to over-index on like how hard I have it, but as you can imagine, it's been challenging because some of the things that you speak about, your leadership, and while I'm relatively new to this leadership role, I see a lot of these things happening both in my walkabouts inside of my organization and beyond. This idea that folks want to be proximate to Blackness and close to Blackness, but also feel some sort of push-pull around actually following and actually being led. I see that more frequently than I care to, but I also see a lot of people rallying behind me at the same time. I felt very protected and elevated by folks in my community at work, and really felt like a lot of folks from different backgrounds have been showing up in service of Black folks at my organization and beyond. And so when I think about this moment, we have so far to go. We still have so much to do. We still have so much money to spend. I looked at like all the articles that came out about the commitments that corporations and philanthropy have made, and how we are kind of not meeting our commitments necessarily, and what the work that we need to do. And I know that internally at our organization, we've been pushing really hard, and it's been working. It's funny how different it was, because before that we were all kind of internal organizing around a few things, and there was openness, and in some spaces a little resistance. And this moment, you know, to your point earlier, Zoe, it came at a high cost, but this moment did open up some blockers in a way that that allowed for meaningful change in the way we structure our grants and the way we engage with our partners, and just being thoughtful and intentional about who we identify and the process by which we identify folks. So I see this as a re-energizing of this moment, Juneteenth, and just to re-energize and recommit, and to like I had a conversation just yesterday about, okay, we still have X amount of dollars to spend this year. How are we getting them out? How are we being intentional about embedding racial equity in our strategies, taking criteria and actually putting it into action? So and I also see a lot of really amazing leaders stepping into new roles in philanthropy. When I started at the Hewlett Foundation, I was one of very few people that looked like me in the space. And now when I look back, you know, it feels like a long time ago. It was only about 4 years. It looks much different, and the portfolios look much different. So I see an opportunity. I see there's a commitment, and it's still really challenging. So I hope that kind of answers the question about how I rejuvenate and how I see philanthropy moving forward. And I think these types of conversations need to keep happening. And I wish we could just like implant them into all these different institutions so folks can continue to hear and continue to see. And I also am in this place, and I would love for somebody to interrupt me at some point, but I'm just like, how do we take the onus off of us to make sure we continue to prove ourselves, right? Like, how do we put the onus on philanthropy, the onus on big business to do the work and to move this forward, so it doesn't fully fall on people of color and the most marginalized among us? So that's kind of the piece where it's like, I see us doing the work and pushing it forward, but we're tired. And so we need a little bit of support. So that's my perspective. Hopefully that answered your question.
No, I appreciate that. I completely agree with you, and I'm glad to hear for each of you that you grateful for the question, and then also grateful to each of you that you had a very specific and very direct answer to that. That you are taking care of yourself, because that preservation is in fact the only way, given the work that everyone has spoken about. It is you know, the preservation that we're doing for ourselves is the only way that we are going to arrive at the place that we know that we all need to be. So I'm just really in great gratitude. I know we're wrapping up. I just want to say thank you. That would be my final. Thank you to everyone who attend, who are supporters of National Employment Law Project, of National Center for Lesbian Rights, and East Bay Community Law Center, and certainly supporters, whether personal or professional, kind of supporter of us, all of us individually. And I'm just really grateful for people coming today.
And thank you again for having me, and thank you all for answering all the questions. Yeah.
All right, well, with that, thank you everyone, please, and thank you you see our contact information in the chat. Please be in touch with us, and we hope that you will celebrate Juneteenth or honor Juneteenth, really reflecting on the history and thinking about what Black liberation means, as well as all the celebration and joy that can come with additional rest and a time to be intentional about what it means to be away from work. So thank you all. Hope everyone has a joyous Juneteenth.